Sudowrite is an AI fiction writing business that has made significant strides in recent months, at least since I last made a video about them. So I thought it was high time to create a all-in-one course for Sudowrite that you can just go through this entire thing and you'll know pretty much everything there is to know about Sudowrite, at least to get started. We're going to cover all of its features, its fine-tuned model, which is actually really impressive, how much it costs, how it works, and much more. Here is a list of everything that we're going to cover, and please refer to the timestamps if you want to jump ahead to a specific section. Now let's start by talking about pricing. Sudowrite has a different pricing structure than the other tools that I feature on this channel, such as Novelcrafter or Raptorite, and it actually makes them one of the more expensive tools, and there are things about it I don't quite like, but we can cover those. First of all, there's 3 tiers. If you pay monthly, you'll get them at $19, $29, or $59, and you'll want at least the $29 tier. Now, if you go annually, you will save a little bit per month, but you'll have to pay it all at once, so that can give you a little bit of savings, but I'm just going to go under the assumption that we're going monthly. So for the $29 per month tier, you get 1 million credits per month. And if you're wondering what a credit is, it's kind of hard to explain. Think of it almost like AI tokens, but not quite, okay? So the number of credits you have get used up every time you use the AI inside of Sudowrite. So you have a limited number of credits, 1 million per month in this case, but how you use those credits depends on the AI model that you are using. So the more expensive models, like say Claude 3 Opus, are going to use more credits than the really inexpensive models like Claude 3 Haiku or GPT-4o Mini. Those will not use nearly as many credits as the beefier models, and they have their own fine-tuned model, and that one is also pretty expensive, and so that one will use up a lot of credits as well. So it really depends on which model you're using, and that's going to vary depending on your use case. So it's kind of hard to really accurately describe how far that million credits is going to go for you, because it really depends on a lot of things. But I will say, for those who are serious about Sudowrite, you might want to also consider the $60 tier, because it gives you twice as much, 2 million credits per month, but then they also roll over for 12 months, meaning you can keep using those credits. If you don't use them all in 1 month, but then you come and you write a ton in the next month, you can use the old credits. So that's useful. And this is actually what I'm currently using myself, because I'm heavily using the Muse model recently. So this is actually what I have, but you're going to at least want the $29 a month tier. I would not really recommend the $19 per month, because that only gives you 250,000 credits for 2/3 of the price. So it's not really worth it to me. So when you log into Sudowrite, you'll be greeted with a scene something like this, although you won't have any projects here if you're just starting out. You can start a new project here. You can create a new project or a folder or a series, which is essentially the same as a folder, but it's highlighted, it's like labeled as your series. And that's a handy feature. Folders didn't exist here before, and so it was very cluttered, and it looks very clean, very nice. I like the overall landing page design here. I like simple, I like minimalist, and so this is great for that. Here you can see the resources that they have available. They have live classes, which can be really helpful if you're stuck on something. Those are completely free if you have a Sudowrite subscription. You can just attend those live classes. They also have a really good community and their own YouTube channel and some documentation. Additionally, up here in the settings in the top right corner here, you can adjust a few things. If you want the text size to be a little bigger, you can, line spacing, all kinds of little things to affect the design. You can even affect the font of the text. But one of the important things that you can see here is the theme. Now, by default, it's got this sorbet theme, like peachy and the pinkish, purplish theme that they got going on here. To be quite honest, and pay attention, Sudowrite folks, if you're watching this, I don't love this color, but that's just me. So the one I like the most, you can change the theme to a bunch of different things. So there's like charcoal, which is this darker theme, which is nice. You can play around with all of these. Forest is nice. It's got this nice deep green. But my personal favorite is Aurora Borealis, which is kind of this like darker, slight bluish color. And so I'm going to just continue this tutorial with the Aurora Borealis theme in there, just because it pleases me. So we're going to go ahead and create a new file. You can also import a document if you have one and you want to work on it. You can import docs, text files, RTFs, and ODT files. All of those can be placed inside here, and it'll import your manuscript for you so that you can then play around with it in Sudowrite. As with most software tools that have an import feature, you're probably going to run into a couple of small issues with formatting and stuff that you'll have to fix those, but it can definitely save you time. So you're not just copy and pasting everything over into Sudowrite. But we're just going to create a new project. I don't need to create a folder for this. And we're brought into Sudowrite, the actual writing area. Now you've got history on this side, along with some ads here for the community and the live classes and such. On this side, you've got your actual files and chapters that you go here. This one's called Untitled. We're just going to call it Chapter 1 for our purposes. Up here, you have a couple of different tools that they have available. And then, of course, in the middle is the actual writing space. So I'll give you a brief tour and then we'll go in depth on everything here. So up at the top left, we have the writing. So you can write by automatically. You can guide your writing. You can ask it to basically shift the tone of the writing. And you have a couple of settings for all of those features. Here under rewrite, you've got, well, this is just for rewriting. You select a section of text and rewrite it. Same with describe. You select a section of text and have it describe it, add more sensory details and that sort of thing. There's a brainstorming tab here. You click on this and you can do some brainstorming. And then plugins, which are community-based prompts and things that you can incorporate into Sudowrite, which makes it a lot more versatile than it used to be. These plugins can be really useful if you play around with those. Now down here on the bottom left, you have the story Bible. I'll go more in depth on this in a second, but this is essentially, if we turn this on, it gives us a space to add just a brain dump of information about the genre, the style, the synopsis, the characters, the world building, and the outline. And again, I'll go in depth on that in a minute. And then there's this feature here called Canvas, which I'll also go in depth on, but I just suffice it to say, it's not my favorite feature. It's not really something you're likely to use very much, especially since they've incorporated a lot of the features that were interesting about Canvas into other features like the outline. Let's talk about the big thing that makes Sudowrite kind of awesome, and that is their own fine-tuned model. This is honestly the main reason I am making this video right now, because it is the best model I have ever seen for creative writing specifically, and not just for any kind of writing, specifically for writing a first draft. I wouldn't necessarily use it. I don't think you can use it at this point for things like brainstorming and things like that. But for actual writing, it is fantastic. It is specifically designed to do that, and it does a good job. Not only is the prose good, but it actually understands logical consistency inside of a scene like no other LLM has done before. And so it's called Muse, and right now, as I'm recording this, it is in closed beta. By the time you see this, it will likely be in open beta. If not, it will be soon, but I do need to make sure I talk about it because this is, in my opinion, the single best feature that Sudowrite has, and almost single-handedly makes a subscription worth it. So let me show you exactly what that looks like. There's a couple of ways to interact with the Muse model, and let's go over some of them right now. So for instance, right here, if you at the top under write, you go to write settings, you can select which model is used in the write features. And right now it's already selected as Muse beta. You can of course select other models too if you want. There's a bunch of them here. You got like GPT-4o, all the Claude models. They also have these models up here. This is Claude 3 Opus, Claude 3.5 Sonnet, GPT-4o Mini. That's the one you want to use if you don't want to use a whole lot of credits. Just use GPT-4o Mini. You'll get practically unlimited usage out of that because it's so cheap. But the one I just love at this point is Sudowrite's Muse. Now, it is a little bit on the pricier side, meaning it will use up more of your credits faster. And I have found that it uses credits quite quickly. I even bought a pack of additional words so I could have a ton to work with. But the prose quality, as it says here, is fantastic. And the instruction following, it's not quite as good. Sometimes it does get a little off the rails a little bit, but it's almost worth it to have the prose quality. And then, of course, it is completely unfiltered for the most part. There are certain instances when you might run into some issues where it's not wanting to write what you say, but for the most part, it is completely unfiltered, especially if you're using it here in the write section, as opposed to the chapter generator, which I'll show you in a second. So this is Sudowrite's Muse. So all I have to do is say, use Sudowrite's Muse. It's located here. You can select the amount of creativity. I usually like this to have it up here closer to most creativity. This is a slider representing the temperature of the model, which is something you can adjust for pretty much any model outside of Sudowrite. You know, if you go directly through the APIs like on OpenRouter, you can adjust the temperature. Here, they just call it creativity, which is, you know, I guess that makes a little bit of sense. But if you put this up too high, it's going to start making not a lot of sense. You put it it too low, it's going to follow your instructions better, but it's also not going to sound as great. So I like it to be about here, roughly the 75% mark, particularly when I'm using it in the write section. You can select the number of cards you want. So I always leave this at 1 because I don't want it to use too many words. And then you can also select the number of words per card. I usually go with 250 words here as the sweet spot, but you can also go a little higher if you want, or a little lower if you want. And then key details. This is a place where you can give it important details for the scene that you're currently writing so that it knows things that it should know just as context for the scene. Now, there's going to be other places where you can do that too. For instance, in the story Bible, you can put a lot of that information as well. But if you just want to do something simple, you're not filling out the whole story Bible, then you can just put all of that information here under key details. But I'm going to leave that off for now. So let's demonstrate what the write function does here. So there's two different types. Well, there's three, but there's really two that you're going to use most, and that is autocomplete and guided. The one I use the most is guided, so let me show you that one first. Now, I found when using the Muse model, it often performs best if I have just a little bit of writing already here for it to kind of bounce off of. So I'm just going to write a sentence or two here manually. Let's see. Okay, so I just wrote one sentence here. Elaine slammed the door to her room behind her, then clutched her arms to her sides and slid down the closed door, the sobs bursting out without her consent as she melted to the floor. So I don't know where this story is going. I just wrote something. So let's go ahead and use guided write, and we'll add some information about the scene here. So because it's only going to be writing 250 words, that's what I had designated to 250 per card. What I'm going to do is just write something very simple. I don't want to give it too much information because it's not going to necessarily be able to convey all of that information in 250 words. So I'm just going to say something like the very next part of the scene. Elaine has broken up with her boyfriend, James, and she can't deal with it right now because her mother is also sick. So just a really quick thing there. All I have to do is hit go, and then over here on the right, it's going to write out the next 250-ish words. And if I like it, I can hit insert, or I can just copy it and then paste it into here. I can also give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If the result was not great, I could give it a thumbs down. I could also star it. It was a response I really, really liked. But generally, all I have to do is insert, and we can now see what Muse wrote us. She buried her face in her knees, the raw pain of losing James mixing with the fear of her mother until she couldn't tell which was worse. They had only been together 6 months, but in that short time, he'd become the center of her universe. She thought he would understand when she said she needed to spend more time with her mom right now, that he'd be supportive, that he'd wait. But instead, he'd accused her of using her mother as an excuse to push him away, of not really caring about him. How could he not see that she was drowning, trying to keep up with school and work and endless hours at the hospital? She just wanted to sleep for a week, to make it all go away. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. For a moment, she hoped it was James calling to apologize, to say he hadn't meant any of it. But when she pulled it out and looked at the screen, her heart sank deeper. It was her brother, Sam. So now it's actually going off the rails a little bit, and it can sometimes do that when you're just starting out in the scene, because it kind of got through the story information I gave it really quickly. She let it go to voicemail. Sam wouldn't want to know how the breakup went. He never liked James, thought he was too controlling, but Elaine knew he just didn't understand their relationship. Still, he was the only one she could talk to about any of this, about James, about mom, even if she didn't always like what he had to say. The phone started buzzing again. This time she answered. What? She snapped, and immediately felt bad. Sam didn't deserve her anger. Elaine, he said, his voice tight, you need to come to the hospital. Her stomach clenched. So what I like about Muse, even though it has gotten a little creative here and gone into territory that I did not ask it to do, it has a really good understanding of a good scene. It has added some conflict here that is perfect for the kind of scene that we're trying to build here. Now, it might not be exactly what I want, and I can go back and fix that. But let's just say, let's turn this into an urban fantasy. Let's do another guided write and say, while Elaine is driving to the hospital, she sees something strange out her window, or we'll just say something strange. A comical looking man suddenly disappearing in a flash of light after he smiled knowingly at her. Okay, so we'll run that, and then of course it's going to generate the card over here. I already said that I generate just one card at a time. I usually find it sufficient, but you can also generate more than one. And the reason I only do one is because it uses fewer credits, so I don't have to worry about that. And so we insert this, and it continues off from where it left off. So Elaine gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The car's heater struggled against the biting November air, and she rubbed her hands together in between turns, trying to coax some life back into her frozen fingers. Yada, 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 yada. And then here it gets to the part that I described. As she crossed the intersection, something caught her eye. A man standing on the corner, dressed in a garishly bright yellow trench coat and fedora, like a cartoon detective from the 1940s, which is, again, really great creative input here. He held a large purple umbrella, though there wasn't a drop of rain in sight. Elaine did a double take. The man was looking straight at her, an exaggerated smile stretching across his face. There was something almost clown-like about him, comically absurd, yet uncomfortable. So it got to the end and didn't get to the part where he vanishes in a flash of light. I found this to be the case with Muse a lot, and I'm okay with it because usually what it's doing is it realized in order to get to that part in the story, it had to give it kind of a transition. So it gave me all of this information about her getting in the car and everything and driving and her worries about her mother and all of that and describing the man. And so if I wanted it to continue, I would just go and run this prompt again and it would continue on and show the man disappearing. But let's say we don't want to do that. Let's say we want to use the autocomplete, which is also using Muse. All I'd have to do here is make sure autocomplete is selected and then just hit right, and it will continue based on what it thinks is doing, it thinks it should do next. Now, I would not normally do this with most AI models, but Muse tends to actually have decent results. This is one situation though where I might ask it to have several cards so I can have something to choose from, and it becomes almost a sort of choose your own adventure game. So here's what it's given me. I'll just insert it here. She felt a shiver run down her spine, but when she looked back in her rearview mirror, he was gone. The hospital parking lot was nearly full, and Elaine circled twice before finding a spot. So it has her come to the hospital. Her phone beeps, and the message is from Sam saying, "Where are you?" She typed out in the parking lot. Like, it's really got the conflict of her mother being sick. Then here at the end, we have she sent the text and opened her door, bracing against the icy wind that whipped through the garage. As she walked through the elevator, she noticed a flash of yellow out of the corner of her eye. She turned quickly, expecting to see the man in the trench coat and fedora, but there was nothing, just a sea of dull-colored cars and a few scattered patches of snow. So, as you can see, the prose here is actually pretty good. There are occasions when it sounds a little bit more AI-ish, but a lot of the AI-isms that are common in AI writing is a lot of them are not here, or they're severely reduced. So that's the right section. You also have a tone shift here. So let's say we wanted this to be a little bit more, let's just make it a little more upbeat, right? The way this works is I just go to where I want it to write, hit write upbeat, and it's essentially doing the autocomplete with no guidance whatsoever, but it does so with the new style in mind. So now we have a more upbeat version of the text right here. So that's the whole write feature. It's the thing that I use probably most frequently, especially with Muse. I find that going one step at a time with Muse as the primary model is probably my favorite way to write right now inside of Sudowrite. But there are some other ways that you can do it. So let's go ahead and move on to the other features that we have along here on the top. We have rewrite. Now, I'm not certain if this one is using Muse or not. I kind of don't think so. Let's test it out and see. I don't use this feature too often, but let's just select some text here, and you can either select rewrite right here, and you can select how many cards you want. Again, I'm just using one, or you can select it and it will actually appear here where you can just select rewrite. And before it actually runs it, you can select how do you want to rewrite. So you can ask it to rephrase it to make it shorter, more descriptive, show don't tell, more inner conflict, more intense, or you can customize it and say rewrite to be more quirky or whatever else you want to include in here. So I'm going to say be more like an urban fantasy. Okay, just selecting that text, and then we hit go, and it will pull up a card here on the left. Elaine slams the door to her room, the desperate sobs coursing through her body as she slides down the closed door. So this is definitely not using Muse. This sounds a lot more like AI. She feels the weight of the world crushing her between the loss of James and the terrifying powers awakening within her. There's their more urban fantasy, right? They had only been together for 6 months, but in that short time, he had been her protector, her guide in this strange new realm. Yet when she said she needed to focus on her mother's illness, he accused her of using it as an excuse to push him away. So it's done what I've asked. It didn't do a really good job because it's not using Muse as a model, but there you go. Now, likewise, you can select describe. Let's say there aren't enough descriptive elements in this section. So it's a very similar thing. You can just come here to describe. And when you select describe, make sure you have the appropriate one selected. So you can have this section described more from the senses of sight, smell, taste, sound, touch, metaphor. This is not necessarily something that is meant to be used verbatim. Like, don't use the text, all of the text that it gives you, because it's going to give you too much. But it can give you ideas like, oh yeah, I should have included more description of her room being a mess, which we see here. So I hit describe and it gave me these options here on the side. I could say, yeah, Elaine's room was a mess, clothes scattered on the floor and makeup smudged on her face from crying. The door stands ajar. So I can take elements of this and include it in the scene. So it's a good way to just get ideas for things that you may have missed in the description process. But again, I would not use most of this verbatim. Maybe just copy and paste phrases here and there that work. So that was sight. Down here we have smell. Her room smelled of lavender from the candle she lit earlier. See, that doesn't even make sense. Her throat is raw and dry from crying. A metallic taste of blood lingering from where she bit her lip to keep from screaming. You know, that could be an interesting sensory detail to add in there. We've got sound, we've got touch. We even have metaphor, which can give you ideas for metaphors. Elaine was a storm, a tempest of emotion and pain, her heart heavy with the weight of loss and responsibility. So it gives you a couple of options there that could give you ideas. But again, don't use this verbatim. So that's rewrite and describe. Now, you don't see it up here, but if you select a section of the text, you get some additional options like expand and quick edit. Let me show you expand first, because expand does use Muse in how it generates the text. And that can actually be a really useful tool, and I'll explain why. So hit expand, and now it's writing the same text, but it's spending a little more time with it. So if you get to a point in the story where you think the AI has glossed over a few things too much, you can select that section and expand it. But you can also do a couple of other things. So for instance, I could include a couple of commands in here, like make this more comedic. And then when I select this and ask it to expand, it will actually keep that command in mind. And here it goes. She struck a melodramatic pose, clutching her arms to her side as if performing a tragic play, and slid down the door like a deflated balloon. Sobs burst out of her like confetti from a party popper, and she collapsed into a weepy puddle on the floor. Definitely more comedic for that specific section. So it's really useful, and you can even use this almost as a way to write your story, where you just kind of write out the general summary of what happens in the scene and then just expand each section using the expand feature. That could actually be another way that you can write if you don't want to just write linearly like I was showing you before. Last but not least, we have the quick edit. So all you have to do is hit this button or hit Control K, and it'll pull up the quick edit section where you can just basically just tell it how you want to edit the section. It does give you an option to use Muse or not. So right now, if you leave this untoggled, I don't think it actually uses any credits, or uses very few. And that's the same for this quick chat, which allows you to ask questions about the project. But again, if you just toggle this on and say use Muse, it's going to rewrite it even better. So I could say like rewrite this to sound more like H.P. Lovecraft. I always like using that because H.P. Lovecraft has a very unique style. Elaine flung the portal to her chamber with a force that reverberated through the eldritch confines of the house and collapsed against the now sealed threshold, her form sinking slowly to the floor, etc. I'm just going to reject this. We're not going to use that. But that's the quick edit feature. It gives you a little bit more versatility on how you can interact with the text. And I will say that quick edit feature is something that Novelcrafter doesn't have, and it can actually be a really useful feature. So kudos to Sudowrite for putting that one in there. These are just the basic features though. I really want to get to the powerhouse of what Sudowrite is capable of doing by talking about the chapter generator and the story Bible. So let's get into that next. So for this, we're going to actually need to, I'm going to leave this, but we're going to create a new chapter. So you can, up here, you just select new blank document and select, and we'll just call this chapter 2. And down here is our story Bible. So all I have to do is click on one of these, or you can scroll down and it'll bring you down to brain dump, so that you just include everything that you need to know about your book. All of that, you can just pile it in there. Don't worry about filtering it. Just put everything that you know about your story here into the brain dump. And then once you have that, this is an urban fantasy story that is also a metaphor for love of one's mother and coping with loss. Okay. Once you've got something in here, you can also select the genre here. So we'll call this a urban fantasy, and you can select a style. I'm actually going to leave this blank for now because Muse does style pretty well, and I don't often like to influence it too much with style here, but you can add some style. And then a synopsis. Now, you can generate a synopsis based on everything that you've created so far. So I've made it clear this is an urban fantasy and it's a metaphor for love of one's mother and coping with loss. And so now if I select generate synopsis, it's going to actually generate a synopsis for this story based on what I've put in the brain dump. Now, it's invented new characters here because I did not specify anything about the character Helene or anything like that. And it's a man instead of a woman. But let's just say we want to go with this. You can, of course, put anything else that you want in the brain dump if you want it to know those things, and it will take that into account when creating this synopsis. You can also use this space right here to rewrite the synopsis. And then right here beneath the synopsis section is the characters. So because we've generated the synopsis, this is actually really easy. All I have to do here is select generate all characters. And it gives me a couple of different characters here. Now, I will point out that a lot of these names are very AI-ish. I've gotten Thorn before. I've gotten like Lyra Vale is as AI as it comes. Blackwood is another AI name. Arya is another AI name that I hear a lot. So keep that in mind. And you definitely want to have a lot of human input at this stage. But because this is just a quick tutorial, I'm not going to go through and validate all of this, but you definitely want to go through all of this and make sure it's all set up. But you can edit all of these to your heart's desire. So let's take a look at this main character here. So it gives us the pronouns, he, him, groups that he's associated with, other names. So those aren't naturally filled in, but you can fill those in as you so desire. It gives us information about his personality, about his background, about his physical description, and his dialogue style. Dialogue styles in particular is very important because it determines how they're going to sound when the AI generates their text. That's an important thing to make sure you have filled out. Now, if you don't like any of these, you can ask the AI to just rewrite it here. You can also select how it is used. So I say this one by default, it says used automatically, which means it will only use this information if it's relevant to the scene, if it deems it relevant to the scene. Like for instance, if this character is in the scene, it will use this automatically. You can also say like, no, I don't actually want the AI to know this. So if I said never, this information here is just for me to know. It might be something I don't want the AI to really understand or keep in mind. So I just select never, or I might want it to always remember what this section, so it's always bringing that into the prompt. Now that is currently not available, but it does say coming soon here. But for the most part, you'll probably just want this set on automatically. And the same goes at the character level. So if you select these three dots in the top corner, you can have it set to automatically or never if you want this character to be used in the scene or not. Additionally, this dropdown, you can select the role that the character has. Are they the protagonist, the antagonist, a supporting character, a minor character, or a love interest? Unfortunately, they don't give you an option to select to create your own and include it in this dropdown. So it has to be one of these supporting characters, minor characters, love interest, or protagonist. I'm just going to select protagonist for this guy, and we can go ahead and say maybe that she's the love interest. I don't know. I'd have to actually go through and read it. We'll just call this a supporting character, minor character. You can go through all of them. And again, if you don't like this, you can always regenerate any of these sections by rewriting it here or by just rewriting it yourself, adding your own details. All of that's very possible. You can even add new traits here. So let's say there's something else I want to talk about other than their personality, background, physical description, and dialogue style. Let's say they have a specific superpower, right? So I could call this superpower, and now this person, I could just type in can fly, right? And now it knows that this person has a specific superpower of flight, and I can ask it to include this automatically and so forth, right? So there's a lot of flexibility here, which is great considering that they didn't used to have all of this flexibility with their tools before. This has gotten a lot better since I last made a video about it. All right, the same kind of runs for the world building as well. So I could select here under world building, I can just say generate element, and it could be like a setting, organization, lore, key event, etc. All of these things are things that you might need, particularly settings. So you have specific locations. And let's see, the Avalon Hospital is a magical hospital for people gifted with magic. And then I hit go, and it will generate that section for me. So now it's giving me a lot more information about the hospital, including a sensory description and the actual location. Now, I'm not thrilled with the text that it gave me here. It sounds very AI-ish. The hospital's corridors hum with a subtle magical resonance. Like that's not something that I need in there. So I would probably rewrite a lot of this if I were doing this intentionally. But honestly, it's a great place to start to have that option available to you. All right, last but not least, we got to talk about the outline. So you can generate a full outline just straight from this. All you have to do here is select this little icon right here, and you can select what type of outline you want it to follow. There's several here: novel outline, hero's journey, Hollywood beats, which is essentially the same as Save the Cat, the story circle, a romance outline, or a custom outline where you put your instructions here. So let's just go with let's go with the Hollywood Beats outline. So use the Hollywood Beats, and now I can hit generate, and it will automatically, from everything that we've covered so far about the characters, the locations, the brain dump, the synopsis, it will generate the full outline. It does a decent job at it too. And then once that's finished, you can look through every chapter. It's got a bunch of different chapters here, 15 because we're going off of the Save the Cat beats here, the Hollywood formula. And so that's great. If it fits with your vision, you can definitely go through with this. Now, if it isn't consistent with your vision, you can always rewrite each section here and give it some instructions on how you would like it to be rewritten. You can also add a new chapter here, and then we could either fill this in with our own information here, or we could have it generate the chapter for us, and you can give it a little bit of information about the chapter here. But that's just how you add on chapters manually if you want to go one step at a time, which is totally fine to do. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. So let's say we actually want to write the prose, and Sudowrite, particularly with the Muse model, is now capable of doing this really well. So let's say we want to write this first chapter here. All we have to do, well, we could come up to chapter 1 over here, but I'm going to select this dot here and say create chapter 1, the grief-stricken mechanic, and it'll create that document right here. So now it's got all of the information that it needs. It's got the synopsis, the characters, the world building, etc. And it has the outline of this particular chapter in mind. What I can then do is I can actually come over here and select either generate beats or generate scene directions, or I can just come here and put it myself. With Muse, I actually find that generating beats is not necessarily as important as it used to be. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to copy the text of this first chapter, and we're going to use that instead. So I'm going to just paste that in there, and rather than just hitting generate, I'm going to make sure to click this thing and make sure we are using Muse. Now, as I'm recording this, there's like different versions of the beta that it's using, and the latest, most advanced is 0.5. You might see something different by the time this goes out, but I'm just going to select the latest and most advanced, and so I can say use Muse. And then one of the interesting things, it actually gives you some instructions on how to give information about the scene, and you can also put in up to 100 words of your own text if you want it to write in your specific style. Now, 100 words isn't a lot, but I can go ahead and just put in a little bit of information there because it does help the output a little bit. And now all I have to do is select the creativity. Again, I'm going to go with 7 because that is the recommended here. There are some cool things that you can do if you really crank it up, or if you want it to be super reliable to your instructions, but maybe not as creative, not as soulful, you can select that here. But I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at 7 and hit generate. And now it's actually going to go through and generate this entire chapter based on this summary of the chapter. So just so you're aware of what's happening in this chapter, let's read this. We meet Caden Thorne, a 22-year-old mechanic in New Avalon, as he closes up his enchanted machinery repair shop. His movements are mechanical, his eyes weary as he tries to lose himself in work to avoid the pain of his mother Mara's recent death. So yeah, so that's a great way to start. As you can tell, it takes a little while for this to get started. It's still saying preparing, but this should start generating prose in just a second. And here it's giving us a whole bunch of text. So let's read the first paragraphs here. Caden Thorne wiped his hand on a rag already saturated with grease and enchantment residue. Great opening line, honestly. It sounded like a normal sentence until he said enchantment residue. So that's kind of cool. The mixture of substances left his skin with a familiar, almost comforting tingle. He surveyed the cluttered workbench in front of him, strewn with the guts of a dozen different enchanted devices, each in various stages of disassembly. The chaos had a strange order to it, like the mechanical forest growing along predictable lines. He sighed at the sound, more of a deflation than an expression of emotion, and tossed the rag onto the bench. The small cramped space of Thorne's enchanted repair felt even smaller tonight, the walls closing in like the pages of a book he didn't want to read. He flipped the sign of the front door to closed and began to lock up, his movements slow and deliberate, like a wind-up toy running down. Now, there's a lot of metaphors that it's using here. I find it can sometimes overuse metaphors, and one way to get around that is to lower the creativity just a little bit. But in general, the prose is pretty good here, and it's actually still generating. So we're currently at 1,400 words. That's going to go up. Let's read some of the dialogue here. Caden, you have a gift. Don't hide from it. You could almost hear her say, oh no, that's in his imagination. Let's see if there's. The memory shifted. He saw himself sitting in the hospital's waiting room, its walls adorned with wards and sigils. He held an old dog-eared grimoire, one of Mara's favorites, hoping that reading it would bring him some comfort or understanding. The words swam before his eyes, and he slammed the book shut, the sound echoing through the empty room like a gunshot. We've done all we can, the healer told him a man whose face Caden could no longer recall. Sometimes the magic just runs out. So it's got all of this prose, and the prose is actually pretty good. Still in need of some validation and some editing to make it great, but it's pretty good. And the final word count for this chapter is about 2,000 words, which is exactly the word count that I shoot for when I'm trying to generate a whole chapter. Now, some people like bigger chapters, some people like smaller. You could, of course, add more story information and it would likely write bigger chapters. But on the whole, it did pretty much exactly the amount of word count that I want. Muse is capable of generating word count that is much higher than what you can get out of a typical LLM. So between that and the fact that it writes pretty good prose and the fact that the scenes that it writes are coherent makes it one of the best features of Sudowrite, in my opinion, and kind of almost overwrites all of the issues that I had with Sudowrite in the past. It actually is a much better program now than it used to be 6 months ago. Now, sometimes with the way Muse works, it's better now than it used to be because it's been in beta for a while and it'll probably continue to get better. But I have found that it sometimes gets off the rails a little bit. So if that happens, you can always try again or work with your prompt a little bit. A lot's going to depend on what you put here in the scene beat section. Because again, even though it's a really excellent model, if it's not clearly communicated what it should happen in the scene, it's not going to happen, most likely. So that's just something to keep in mind. One last thing I want to talk about is sometimes, let's say you want to just write a short story based on a simple concept. It is capable of creating entire short stories that are logically consistent within the story based on a very simple prompt. So you could actually produce quite a few short stories that wouldn't need a whole lot of editing and based on a simple idea rather than having to give it the entire thing. Now, that's not how I like to write. I like to make sure I'm micromanaging the whole way and knowing exactly what happens in the story. But some of you might enjoy the exercise of just putting in a single line about a story concept and then having it spit out the entire short story. Now, the way to do that is you have to use a specific version of Muse, and that is accessible by coming here and selecting 11, maybe too creative. And then all you have to do is just select, say what your short story is about. I'm not going to do it right now because this is all cluttered up with information about the world and everything. I would prefer to just have a total blank slate, but that is something that you can do and play around with. It's kind of fun. Now we got to talk about a few of the remaining features that we haven't covered so far. The first is plugins. So in plugins, you just select this item here and then hit Explore Plugins. And it will actually give you a whole bunch of different plugins that you can use if the ones that you have been using are not good enough. Now, these, I believe most, if not all of them, do not use Muse. So these are for other features that you might want. For instance, this one gives you better beats, right? So you can play around with that one. There are a bunch here that add sort of a not safe for work capability to some of it. You can have this one, which it looks like it's a rewrite type of plugin that will write it with more dialogue. Stuff like that. This one will generate a sequel idea for you. So this is actually a really fun place to see all of these community-driven prompts that people use if you want to use it to, generate a sequel idea or whatever the capability of the prompt is. You can actually go through and create your own plugins. That's probably a little bit more advanced than I want to go into this video, but I'll just give you the basics. You come here to create a plugin, and then you call it whatever you want to call it here and give it a description of what the plugin does. You can also make sure, like if you just want this plugin for yourself, you can make it unlisted and you can also make it hidden. Then you select a category. So there's just a bunch of different categories here of like, is this related to the narrative, the characters, etc. And then the instructions on what you actually want the prompt to do. Now you may, if you have a really complex prompt, want to enable story Bible data. So if you want the prompt to look at the story Bible data, you can select enable story Bible data here. Select what you want it to look at. So let's say you want it to know about your characters. So you just select characters, and now this prompt will understand intuitively everything you've written into the character sections of Sudowrite to give it information that it needs there and run the test, or you can just publish the plugin. Additionally, you can click on any one of these plugins and get more information about it, so you can see exactly what the prompt is for the plugin. You can see how many users are using it. You can see how expensive it is for credit usage. So this one is a little bit kind of in the middle, and then you can choose to either put it on your list of plugins or not. So if you do see a plugin that you like, so let's say I wanted to use this Write More Dialogue plugin, I would just hit add. And now if I go back to my main project in Sudowrite and then select the plugin drop down here, that Write More Dialogue plugin is now included here. And all I have to do is select the text that I want it to work on, then select that plugin, write more dialogue, and it will generate that card over here with more dialogue in it. Pretty cool, huh? So that's something that you can use there. Another feature that we haven't covered is the brainstorming feature. I don't use this too much, but it can be a good way to spark ideas. A lot of different things that you can brainstorm here. Let's just select world building. Give me a list of urban fantasy locations. So these are examples that it can use, or you can give it your own examples. Then we hit start and it gives me a bunch of examples here, and I can thumbs up if I like them. So if I like this one, I just say thumbs up. I don't like this one, I can hit thumbs down, and it'll continue to create a bunch of different locations. And then I can use these in my world building as needed. It could be a useful way to brainstorm. Last but probably least is the canvas feature. I'm not a huge fan of the canvas feature. I think this is something they were experimenting with before that isn't really relevant anymore with other updates that they've made. But this is essentially think of it as a cork board where you can put all of your notes, right? So you can put a card here and just say, okay, this is character 1, and give them a name, and then you put that over, you can move that around as needed, just stick it over here. There's not really that much AI functionality in here. You can visualize some of these things if you want, but this is just a way to sort of map out your ideas. You can also do an outline in here. It works pretty much the same way as the outline that I've already showed you. I prefer to do it that way, but you can create an outline here. So this was like the hero's journey, right? And give it your information about the hero's journey, about your story, and then generate the full outline, or you could fill in one chapter at a time. Just like the other one, I think this is a little bit of a messier way to do it, but some people maybe like the layout and the format. That's another way you can do certain things. But generally speaking, I don't touch the canvas myself. I don't think it's really that necessary. It doesn't add much to everything else that we've got here inside of Sudowrite. But that pretty much does it. That's every area of Sudowrite fully explained. So let me cover the pros and the cons of Sudowrite, as well as my general recommendation for its use. The pros are it's very simple. Everything's really easy. It will generate everything for you, and then all you have to do is validate it, right? Like all I had to do is put in all of my brain dump information, and from there I was able to generate a synopsis, and then from there I was able to generate the characters and the world building and the outline all very, very quickly, which is something that you can't do, at least not with the click of a button, in other tools. Now, is it good? It's not bad for sure. They've done a lot of prompting to make sure it's pretty good, but it definitely still needs that human touch to make sure it is the vision that you want and that it's not full of AI names like Lyra Vale, right? But it does make everything really simple. Additionally, the biggest pro, in my opinion, is the fine-tuned Muse model that Sudowrite offers. I think it is by far the best model for writing fiction, period, at least at this point. And I'm sure there will be improvements coming to these models eventually, but so far it is fantastic at writing prose. The cons are, I would say, primarily associated with the pricing scheme. I'm not a fan of it being a higher price and that they have this credit system, mostly because I like how Novelcrafter connects to OpenRouter, and you pay for the words as you go in OpenRouter. So while you are paying for Novelcrafter itself is much cheaper than Sudowrite. And because it connects to OpenRouter, you're only going to be paying for those words if you use them. Whereas with Sudowrite, particularly if you're on the $29 a month plan, you will lose those words if you don't use them. Also, I feel like you get more words for the price by using OpenRouter with Novelcrafter as opposed to using Sudowrite. Additionally, there is not a way to select models that Sudowrite has not already incorporated into their ecosystem. So if we go back to the chapter and I want to, let's say I want to write with a different style, I can come here to write settings and choose from their list of models. But if there's say a brand new model that you want to test out, you can't do it because it's not yet incorporated into Sudowrite. You can only use the models that Sudowrite designates for you. And so that's a bit of a drawback for me. However, and this is my bottom line, I believe that the Muse feature, the Muse model, is single-handedly worth a subscription to Sudowrite for specifically writing the prose. I would not really use Sudowrite to write anything else that is using any of the other models at this point in time. And so my recommendation would be to maybe use Novel Crafter for most things, but then when you're ready to write the actual prose of the story, and I said you could use Novel Crafter, you could also use Raptorite, which is free. You could use a Claude or ChatGPT subscription to do most of your work. But then when you're actually ready to write the actual prose, get a month or two of Sudowrite and then only use Sudowrite for writing that actual prose. That will save you the most money. And because Muse is the best asset that Sudowrite has, I think you should really only be using your credits to use the Muse model. That's my personal opinion. I think it is a great model and does make a subscription to Sudowrite worth it again, in my opinion, but only for writing the first draft. That said, if you're somebody that doesn't like a whole lot of prompting and doesn't want to figure out all of the prompting that goes into generating your characters and your world building and all of that, and you just want a button that will help you do that for you, Sudowrite's great for that too. They make everything really easy. I think that's probably their biggest strength, is they try to keep things simple and easy. There is a balance of trying to figure out how to make it so that it's customizable and flexible without getting too advanced. And that's the issue that they deal with. They lean more on the simple, and I think simple is good, but it does lack a lot in the ability to customize it to your heart's content and to really control the AI. But if you want simple, you don't want to learn all the prompt engineering and everything, Sudowrite might be for you. And that's my bottom line. That's my recommendation. So if you like this video, I have a video talking about all of the different ways the AI can help you as a writer that might not even be included in Sudowrite. You might need a chatbot or something else for it. It's got everything. It's got like 75 different ways that you can use AI. So check that out, and I will see you in the next one.